giving a rookie a chance, like Sam was mentioning about Matthias Norlinder? Like, we're curious about your take on this.
Just before Josh chimes in, I just need to
Sure.
say to Sebastian, I also think Christian Dvorak is going to play center. I just want to say at this point, it's all speculation. I've heard so many things, and I'm totally in agreement with you. You don't trade what you did to get Dvorak to be a winger with all the wingers you have. I'm just saying, cautiously optimistic. What, outside of Evans, Dvorak, that fourth role, or if Evans plays the wing, who takes that spot. So sorry to take some time from you, Josh, but I just need to clarify that I also think Dvorak will play center.
Oh no, that's okay, Sam. But at the same time, it's like I mentioned earlier in the Habs Blitz segment. I mean, the reports are ridiculous. You're hearing everything from everyone. And I said one guy is saying, "Oh yeah, Cofield's gonna score 50 goals," and the next guy is like, "Yeah, Cofield's gonna start in Laval." Come on, not gonna happen. Josh, go ahead, man.
Yeah, I think there's only really two places to look at with the training camp and the preseason games, that center and defense. So I'm going to switch it over to the defense again. With Matthias Norlinder, I hope that they don't play him this year. I haven't looked at it too much, been able to see many SHL games, but I think the more experience he gets, the better before coming over to the NHL. I think that's why someone like Chris Weidman was brought in. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see because Norlinder's clearly the closest, it seems, to taking a spot in the NHL of all the Montreal rookies. So that would put a bit of a hot seat on Chris Weidman. And Weidman's a defenseman that we just don't really have on the team. If you look at the defenders that we have Petrie, who, enough said, when he's on, he's a Norris Trophy candidate like he was at the start of the year, and he can put up points and he can defend. But then you got Ben Sherrod, who's more of a defensive guy. David Savard, who's very defensive. Joel Edmondson, he's not known for offense. And we got past Toronto with like 2 points from the defense or something like that. And the defense in Vegas was just destroying us offensively. And Gustafson was brought in for a Chris Weidman role, and he didn't fully work out. He was very, very sheltered. Got the one goal, but that was about it. I'm hoping Weidman could come in with that fire that someone could be knocking on the door and really provide some offense for the defense that really needs some offensive output.
It's a really interesting take there, Josh. Scott, agree or disagree with that assessment?
I'm going to throw a bit of caution to the wind here, and I'm not only going to agree with that assessment about Chris Weidman, but I'm going to throw my own player into the mix that I feel kind of fits into the same scheme as Chris Weidman, and that is Jean-Sébastien D. Now, I know there's going to be a bit of an argument that's going to be made there immediately of people thinking, why are you talking about Jean-Sébastien D? Obviously, he was an AHL signing. Obviously,
again.
He's a player who I've discussed before, but he's still a player who I am very supportive of and a player who I think has some talent to his game. Now, both Weidman and D found themselves in their own sort of star situation, for better or for worse. D found himself at the forefront of the Buffalo Sabres 18-game losing streak when he played at center on their first line for whatever reason. He still had a respectable season in the AHL with the Rochester Americans. And Chris Weidman led all KHL defensemen in scoring last season and reportedly turned down a $2 million offer to come to Montreal and play here. So it's obvious that Chris Weidman was guaranteed an NHL role. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have come to North America in the first place. But I think both D and Weidman have an upside to their game that just makes them interesting players to look out for. Back when the Habs acquired Joseph Blandisi a long time ago, even though they didn't qualify him this past offseason, Blandisi and D are similar kind of players in the fact that no matter how long they spend in the AHL, they're always a threat to make the NHL and make a comeback. As just when you think they're gone and just when you think their careers are over, they find their way back onto NHL ice. I think with the Canadians, you can point to the times when they've used Kenny Agostino, Michael Chaput, Bobby Farnham, all these AHL guys who slowly but surely found themselves into bottom six roles because they brought good atmosphere to the locker room. They were good players on the ice, and they just played solid defensive roles. Now, regarding Chris Weidman, I definitely think that it could be the Eric Gustafson that wasn't for the Canadians, at least in terms of his defensive responsibilities, and also his offensive upside. Remember, he led all KHL defensemen in scoring, and he's a one-time 60-point defenseman in the AHL. So I'll definitely agree with Joshua there, and I think that Weidman and D are my personal picks for guys who could surprise at training camp.
Yeah, I know we made I made that little again joke, because it has been a couple of times you were talking about Jean-Sébastien D, but it also kind of ties into how deep the Rocket are. Like, you could take almost anybody from the top two lines, and it's like, hey, they can come back in an emergency role, even defensively. They got a lot of really talented players. But that being said, though, there is something that we have never covered, because we're so focused on the center line. We're so focused on the defense, like who's going to replace Weber and stuff like that. And Sam, I would like to know your take about this, just to kind of tie this segment up. I know Carey Price and Jake Allen, they're 1 and 2 no matter what. But if one of them goes down, like what happens? Do we just rely on Primo?
I'm so glad you asked me that, because I wanted to give everyone a little, time to talk and pick their players that they're looking forward to. But that is another main primary position that I think that is a target to watch throughout preseason, because we know Price's injury history. We know how he is when he's healthy. We know Jake Allen was probably the reason Montreal made the playoffs to begin with when Price went down, as Sebastian's saying.
Absolutely.
Yep. We all know that. And so Jake Allen, as great as he was, if Price is to miss extended period of time at some point, or Allen, who is that backup that's going to be able to really have that impact? And we saw a little bit of Kane Primo. And I think we can all agree that he is a diamond in the rough. He is a guy that was picked late in the draft, in his draft year. But a guy that, I wouldn't say he's proven himself. I think there's other guys out there. I think Charlie Lindgren is a really interesting name. I think Michael McNiven is another interesting name. And I'm hoping that they're both still on the roster and that I'm not just saying names from a year or two ago, because
Lindgren is now in St. Louis.
Okay,
Yes, unfortunately.
So
Whoops.
McNiven's still there.
We'll just do a quick little blame Sam, because he's been away for a long time. But
No worries, man.
but Michael McNiven's still there, right?
And
Yes.
And they also signed Kevin Poulin, who has NHL experience. So now we have an interesting goaltending battle down in Laval.
Okay, so see, I like interesting goaltending battle. As a former goalie myself, as someone who played as high as, I don't know how you do guys in Montreal, but we played select, which is like, here's house league, where everyone, if you just sign up, you made it. And then select is like, you kind of have to make a team, and there's single A, double A, triple A. I tried out for those teams, but an undersized goalie who, was great in house league and decent in select didn't really make it up that big. I always look at the goaltending battles, when I look at teams and I'll figure out who's going to be that 1A. And that's why the whole Vegas thing in the playoffs with Leonard and then Fleury and then back to Fleury and then Leonard, like that to me just didn't make any sense, because you got to kind of commit to a goalie. But in terms of what we know with Montreal, with Price and Allen, they're locked in as 1 and 2. But who is that number 3 if that person is? And we know it's now not Charlie Lindgren, but we know it's either Caden Primo or Michael McNiven. And I think Michael McNiven has a really good shot at having a good preseason here. I mean, I'm going to be intrigued to see how they kind of go about the goalies. Is it going to be 2 periods and then a third, or are they going to switch every period? I don't know if that's the best call. I think you kind of have to commit to a goalie for a game. You got 6 games. So if you have McNiven, if you have Primo, and then you have Poulin was the last one there, Sebastian. So that's 3 goalies. They each get 2 games. I think you could say a lot about, pick the best goalie of that 3, maybe as that third. I don't know if he would make the roster. I think they would probably ultimately send them back to Laval, but then that creates another logjam in Laval. Who are the 2 goalies there, and where's that third goalie go? So I think McNiven is a really intriguing name. I think Caden Primo is a little bit more well-known because he's played a few more games with the Habs, but he looked a little shell-shocked against the Leafs that one game. He played all right in the other game or 2 that I remember him playing last year. So, let me see what I got on Michael McNiven. And, I don't know much about Poulin, so I'll be watching him as well.
I definitely think Habs fans are trying to kind of put that thought of Pricey and Hurtigan out of their minds. I don't think they want to think back to the days where Antti Niemi and Mike Condon were their main options in net. And in the words of Canadiens fans and writers all over, the Condon broke at some point, and then eventually the season kind of went down the crapper. And Mike Condon, unfortunately, is now just trotting around the AHL and the ECHL, not being able to find a job. But I definitely think going – like you said, Sam, Michael McNiven is a player that me and Sebastian have talked about before, in that weird time where he's for some reason filed for arbitration, wound up getting himself an NHL deal. And well, I don't think he has NHL potential. It kind of points to the same thing that of Zach Fucali when Bergevin made a comment about what Fucali would start. He said that he just didn't have the experience to play in the NHL just yet. I think throwing McNiven into the fold and kind of just having him disrupt the sort of emergence as Primo as the next big backup option, I think it could be really interesting. And a reminder, if all else fails, you have Kevin Poulin, who could definitely start in Laval, and he has the most experience out of any goalie in Laval. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out.
I don't know if it's fatigue or I'm just really that immature, but I just can't stop laughing at the content, bro.
You're not alone.
I still have scars of Dustin Tokarski playing in the playoffs against the Rangers.
Oh, yes, here you go. Exactly.
Now, and the now Buffalo Sabres starter.
Oh, snap.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, God, it's right.
Right, because Allmark went to
Poor
Boston,
Buffalo
right?
fans.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Sorry, Sabres
Poor
fan.
Buffalo
We love
fans.
you.
If the borders clear up, I'm driving to Buffalo just to see a Dustin Tokarski Carey Price matchup.
That's something from my nightmare for sure. God.
There you
At least
go.
Charles Sebastian D can't play at 1C for Buffalo this season, so progress.
All right, to wrap this segment up, I think we could all agree on one thing, though, is that the cool thing about training camp this year is that because there are so many NHL contracts right on the table, and that we've pretty much before a single game has been played, the lineup is already written down. So that opens up so many opportunities for someone to really step up and go, no, man, I want to make this team. And you never know, like a guy like Raphael Harvey-Pinard, who's someone that we love on this show, might actually just end up being, playing on the fourth line for all we know. So to be continued. And now it is my absolute pleasure to present this next interview. Now, the reason why this interview is a little special is not only, we have a very interesting guest, but this is Scout Cowan's first one-on-one with someone on this show. And it's a really, really, really interesting interview. So let's listen to it right now.
Hey, folks, and welcome to the special one-on-one interview segment of Puck and Roll Podcast. Joining us today, it is my pleasure to welcome associate editor for The Athletic and host of the Hockey Inside Out show for the Montreal Gazette, Mr. Julian McKenzie. Welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This is the second podcast I've done this week with someone from the Cowan family. I'm honored.
That's awesome. Obviously, there's been a lot to dissect regarding the Canadiens all season this summer, and every sports analyst and fan alike has been looking for a way to voice their or your opinion. With that in mind, I thought we'd go over your thoughts on a few of the key storylines from this offseason and what the future looks like for the Canadiens heading into the 2021-22 season. First and foremost, the NHL entry draft. While simultaneously seeing potential future stars like Owen Power and Matthew Berners go number 1 and number 2 overall, respectively, it ended with the Canadiens at the forefront of its aftermath for all the wrong reasons. The background behind Logan Mayhew's selection needs no introduction, but leading on from it, what were your thoughts on in the immediate aftermath of the selection?
My whole thing on that was just really, first off, I'll just say like the draft itself. Like I remember just like watching it at home and just thinking, wow, like nothing's really going on. I'll be totally frank, like partway through knowing the Canadiens were like so late in the first round, I watched an episode of Criminal Minds and just like lost like an hour. And I was like, oh, hey, great. The Canadiens haven't picked yet. So it started off with like a night that was just going to be majorly like uneventful. And look, your dad has probably mentioned this, not to mention Stu at all, but like there's nothing like being at the draft. And that's something I hope to eventually experience. And then the Logan Mayhew selection kind of set off like a domino of like really bad like moments at that draft. And I don't know if you remember as well, but the Chicago Blackhawks had a pick after, and considering the allegations that have been surrounding that organization,
Totally.
Seeing Stan Bowman and a group of women behind him just did not look like the greatest look. So what was starting off as like a pretty like mundane night kind of ended off on a pretty bad note. But just to focus more on Logan, I mean, I've put it out already there. Like just the fact that he said that we all know about the story that he did. And we know he tried to at least take himself out of the draft, or at least try to make it so teams wouldn't pick him. But for the Canadiens to do that, it almost kind of sabotaged his attempts at trying to redeem himself. But even at that, like you could also argue he hasn't necessarily even tried to do that himself, based off some of the reporting that we've seen from The Athletic, where the victim in that whole situation says that she didn't really get a sincere apology. And we don't know how that's changed over the last few months, but still, it was just a bit of a mess. And the Canadiens, the fact that they were willing to go through all that trouble was just really puzzling. And I think it's still really puzzling to a lot of people, even now, as Logan will at least not play any meaningful hockey until 2022 at the earliest, thanks to that OHL suspension. So it's a bit of a weird situation. I know a lot of people are going to say he's a good player, but it's for all the headache and stuff that he's willing to kind of impart on the franchise. And the fact that the franchise is willing to take that on, I would imagine a lot of Canadiens fans have a lot of sour tastes in their mouth after that.
I think with the whole thing with Mitchell Miller as well being signed in the USHL, like the NHL just has a lot to deal with regarding all this off ice kind of stuff. I think it's a very interesting situation.